Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Hogwarts is famous for its 4 houses with very distinct qualities, but being sorted into one of them doesn't confine a student to any rigid set of traits. Remember Harry Potter? The Sorting Hat hesitated for a long time because he possessed qualities of all 4 houses at once. Now let's talk about someone we're used to thinking of as the embodiment of Slytherin, Severus Snape. At first glance, he seems like the perfect Slytherin, but if you look more closely, many of his actions would do credit to a true Gryffindor. Let's explore reasons why Snape could have been an outstanding member of Gryffindor House. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Reckless behavior. Gryffindors are famous for their bravery, but sometimes their courage borders on outright recklessness. They rush headlong into danger without a plan and often act impulsively. Harry Potter himself was a master of these stunts. Despite all his Slytherin caution, Snape repeatedly displayed the same kind of recklessness. Remember when he eavesdropped on the prophecy from Trelawney and Dumbledore without any idea of the consequences? That single act set a tragic chain of events in motion. He also created the Sectum Sempra curse as a student, and probably used it, which was a dangerously unhinged thing for any teenager to do. Number 2. Chivalry, or something like it. In his youth, before all the tragedies and drama of Hogwarts, Snape defended his friend with fierce loyalty. Think of how sharply he shut down Petunia when she insulted Lily. He wouldn't tolerate any slight against her. Even after their friendship collapsed because of his own mistakes and the humiliations from James Potter, Snape never stopped caring about Lily. When he learned of Voldemort's plans, he desperately tried to save her without thinking about the fact they hadn't spoken in years. Number 3. Courage. Snape was far braver than many wizards of his time. Even Harry admits this, naming his son in Snape's honor. But Snape's brand of bravery is special, not showy, but deep and honest. He didn't hesitate to rush into the Shrieking Shack to confront Sirius and Lupin. He played an incredibly dangerous double game with Voldemort, knowing exactly how it could end, and he wasn't afraid to argue with Dumbledore himself when he felt the old wizard was asking too much. Number 4. Determination to see things through. If Snape hadn't possessed unbreakable resolve, he could never have played his unbelievably complex role to the end. He knew perfectly well that Voldemort would kill him eventually, yet he never backed down. Even as he lay dying in the Shrieking Shack, he wasn't thinking about himself. He begged Harry to take his memories, the most painful, the most personal, just so the truth could be revealed. Luckily, Harry saw them and realized Snape's every action had been meant to protect him. Number 5. Fearless resolve. The Gryffindor symbol, the lion, is known for its determination. Snape showed this trait throughout his life. The moment Voldemort targeted Lily and her family, Snape switched sides without hesitation. He devoted all his energy to helping Dumbledore carry out a plan that was the only way to protect Harry and avenge Lily. His Patronus, identical to Lily's, remained unchanged for life, symbolizing his eternal loyalty and unwavering resolve. Number 6. Self-sacrifice. Severus Snape lived every day with a noose around his neck. He chose that life. He sat at Voldemort's table, dark eyes watchful, voice calm, but his heart hammered with secrets. One wrong word, and the Dark Lord would have killed him. He knew it. Yet he didn't turn away. When Voldemort demanded loyalty, Snape bent the knee but guarded his mind like steel. Dumbledore knew exactly what he was asking. "You will have to be the bravest man I ever knew," he told Snape. Snape didn't argue, he didn't ask for pity. He accepted the mission, protect Harry Potter, feed the Order of the Phoenix, fool the greatest legilimens who ever lived. Every minute was a sacrifice of safety, peace, and even reputation. People hated him. Students whispered that he was a Death Eater. The Order doubted his loyalty. Even Harry thought he was a traitor. Snape let them. He wore the role like a second skin. He chose to be despised because it was the only way to stay close to Voldemort and keep Harry alive. Gryffindors throw themselves in front of curses for friends. Snape did the same in slower, crueler ways. He gave up everything, his name, his safety, any hope of happiness. He died for a boy he couldn't stand because that boy was all he had left of Lily Evans. That was sacrifice in its rawest form. Number 7, loyalty. Severus. Snape's loyalty was not gentle or forgiving. It was unbreakable iron, forged in grief. Even after Lily Evans lay in her grave, he stayed true to her memory. He could have left Hogwarts. He could have walked away from Albus Dumbledore's plan. But he didn't. He stayed because he had sworn to protect her son, no matter the cost. When Dumbledore asked, "You will protect him?" Snape answered with cold finality, "Always." That single word became a vow carved into his life. He did not like Harry Potter. The boy reminded him too much of James. The sneer in Snape's voice was real, but so was the shield he held over him, year after year. Snape brewed Wolfsbane potion for Remus Lupin. He tried to break Harry's connection to Voldemort's mind. He delivered cryptic warnings. He guarded Hogwarts even under Voldemort's gaze. Every time he had the chance to run, he chose instead to stay, bound by his promise. This was loyalty without reward, no friendship, no gratitude, only the knowledge that he was doing what he had promised, that he was keeping faith with the memory of the girl he had loved. For all his bitterness and cruelty, Snape's heart held one truth. He would betray everything before he betrayed her. Number 8. Ability to admit mistakes. Severus. Snape never said the words "I am sorry" to the people who needed to hear them most. His pride was too sharp, his guilt too deep. But his whole life was an unspoken confession. He knew the truth. He had delivered part of the prophecy to Voldemort. He had set in motion the deaths of Lily and James Potter. That mistake became the chain he carried until his last breath. When he came to Dumbledore, his voice broke with desperation. "Hide them all, then," he pleaded. "Keep her, them, safe, please." In that moment his mask slipped, and for once he did not care who saw his regret. But Lily still died. No apology could bring her back. So Snape chose a harder path. He would atone through action, not words. Every year he spent protecting Harry was an act of penance. He taught in the same castle where his worst memory lived. He watched the boy grow, bearing James's face and Lily's eyes. The pain never softened, but Snape never stopped trying to pay his debt. Gryffindors are famous for admitting when they are wrong, then fighting to make things right. Snape did exactly that, though he did it in silence. His courage was not loud. It was a quiet, endless labor to undo a single, fatal choice. And that took more strength than any spell. Number 9, loyalty to ideals. Severus Snape was a man of many shadows, but his loyalty to what he believed was right never wavered. He made his choice in Dumbledore's office, his face pale and wet with tears. When Dumbledore asked him, "What will you give me in exchange for her safety?" Snape answered without pause, "Anything." That promise bound him to the light, even if he had once walked in darkness. He never pretended his past didn't exist. He carried it like a scar under his black robes, but he drew a line he would not cross again. He became Dumbledore's man, spying at Voldemort's side. When Harry asked, "You've been spying on Voldemort?" Dumbledore simply said, "That is a matter between Severus and myself." The truth was clear. Snape never abandoned the cause he chose. His work was invisible, and he accepted that. He kept Harry alive year after year. He lied to Voldemort's face, knowing one slip would cost him everything. He brewed Wolfsbane for Remus Lupin, helping a man he barely tolerated. These were not the actions of someone serving himself. They were the acts of a man loyal to something greater. Snape's ideals were not the easy slogans of a hero. They were personal, painful. He believed in protecting the innocent, even if he hated them. He chose good knowing it would kill him. That is Gryffindor at its core, standing firm for what is right, no matter how impossible it seems. Number 10. Contempt for cowardice. Severus Snape hated cowardice with a special kind of venom. It wasn't polite or quiet. He sneered at those he thought too weak to stand their ground. When he spoke to his students, the words cut like knives. "Fame isn't everything," he spat at Harry Potter in their first class. He wanted them to be strong, to stand for something. He wouldn't coddle them. He reserved his deepest scorn for Peter Pettigrew, the man who betrayed James and Lily for his own skin. When Voldemort praised Wormtail, Snape's lip curled. He did not hide his disgust. In The Deathly Hallows tea, when Voldemort ordered Wormtail to bring wine, Snape's cold eyes followed every move, judging. He saw a traitor, a rat who sold out friends for safety. Snape's anger at Pettigrew was not about rivalry, it was moral. Even as a Death Eater, Snape understood loyalty and sacrifice. Pettigrew was the opposite of everything Snape valued. He had no courage, no spine. Snape's hatred for him wasn't just Slytherin contempt, it was something that felt closer to Gryffindor rage at betrayal. He taught his students harshly because he wanted them to be braver than he had been in youth. He couldn't forgive himself for past mistakes, but he could make sure others learned to fight. In his dark, biting way, Snape demanded they never be Wormtail. He demanded they never be cowards. Number 11, hidden kindness. Severus Snape wore cruelty like a cloak. He snapped at students. He sneered at Harry Potter in every lesson. Yet beneath the harsh words lay a guarded kindness he refused to claim. When Harry's broom went berserk during a Quidditch match, Snape fixed his gaze on it, murmuring a counter-curse. He was trying to save me, Harry realized later. Snape never admitted it. He simply stalked away, billowing robes hiding the fact he'd just saved James Potter's son. His quiet mercy didn't end there. During the reign of the Carrows at Hogwarts, Snape accepted the role of headmaster. Students called him a tyrant, but he ordered professors like McGonagall not to fight back too hard when punishing rebels. He turned a blind eye when Neville Longbottom's defiance grew too bold. "Snape's not as bad as the Carrows," whispered the DA members. No one thanked him. He didn't want them to. Snape's secret compassion was a choice. He refused the praise Gryffindors loved so much. He did not ask for cheers in the Great Hall. Instead, he delivered covert aid and silent shields. He threatened students who broke rules but rarely turned them over for torture. He watched, calculating, protecting in the only way he could. Even Albus Dumbledore trusted him to keep Hogwarts from crumbling entirely. This hidden kindness was not the softness of Hufflepuffs nor the strategy of Slytherins. It was a lion's stubborn heart that refused to let the innocent suffer. Snape's brand of goodness was like his Patronus, silent, unexpected, shining only for those willing to look closer. Number 12. Ability to forgive in his own way. Severus. Snape never wore forgiveness on his sleeve, but he lived it in the strangest way. He could not forget Voldemort's betrayal. Yet he chose to serve Albus Dumbledore, risking his life every day to undermine the Dark Lord. He accepted a role that required bowing before the very man who murdered the woman he loved. Dumbledore once said to him, "You disgust me," but Snape still obeyed. Not for himself, not for glory, but because he saw no other way to keep his promise to Lily Evans. He never forgave James Potter. The memory of James's arrogance haunted him. He remembered every cruel laugh, every hex, every humiliation. But when it came to Harry, he drew a line he wouldn't cross. "Don't tell me you've grown to care for the boy," Dumbledore prodded. "For him?" Snape spat. "Expecto Patronum." And the silver doe appeared. His answer was clear. He didn't do it for Harry, he did it for Lily. Hatred for James burned in him, yet he would die to keep James's son alive. Snape's forgiveness wasn't gentle. It was jagged and raw. He accepted Harry as his duty. He kept watch even as he insulted him. He brewed wolfsbane for Remus Lupin, the friend of his old enemy. He carried messages. He gave warnings. He hid his true loyalties behind cruel words. No one thanked him. He didn't want thanks. Forgiveness was not letting go of anger. It was choosing to protect despite it. In the end, this was real forgiveness, even if it didn't look like it. It meant carrying hate in one hand and love in the other, and letting love choose the path. Snape was a man who never spoke of mercy, but he practiced it in silence. When Harry bent over his dying body, Snape whispered, "Look at me." Because even at the end, all he wanted was to keep the promise he made to Lily, to protect the last piece of her left in the world. Number 13, capacity for great love. Severus Snape is often remembered as the cold, sardonic, and menacing potions master who terrorized Harry Potter and his friends. Yet beneath that harsh exterior was a heart ablaze with a love so consuming that it directed every choice he made, even at the cost of his soul. Gryffindors are famous for their fierce, sometimes reckless courage, but more than that, they are defined by the strength of their hearts, their capacity to love without reservation. In this respect, Severus Snape's love for Lily Evans was nothing less than lion-hearted, a trait that could have made Godric Gryffindor himself proud. This love did not burn bright and then fade. It endured rejection, disgrace, and war, remaining constant until the last breath left his body. It is the type of love that does not waver even when it is unreturned, a love that gives everything and demands nothing in return. Snape's love for Lily was not merely a fond memory of childhood friendship, but an anchor he clung to when everything else in his life fell apart. He carried it through the darkest corridors of his existence, even as he pledged himself to Voldemort. In The Prince's Tale, Harry is shown Snape's memories and sees the undeniable proof of this devotion. The doe Patronus, so similar to Lily's, glows silver in the darkness as Dumbledore asks, "After all this time?" And Snape responds with a single word that explains the entire truth. Always. This is not the answer of a man who loved lightly or selfishly. It is the answer of someone who made her memory the sole moral compass of his life, who turned his entire existence into penance for failing to save her. Gryffindors are not known for being cautious or calculating. They are people of action, people who take risks because they believe the cause is just. Snape's decision to betray Voldemort was one of the most dangerous gambits in the entire war, placing himself at constant risk of exposure and death. He chose to act for Lily, to honor the memory of the woman he loved, even if it meant serving as a double agent in a conflict that destroyed countless lives. He agreed to kill Dumbledore in order to protect Draco Malfoy's soul, showing again that his choices were shaped by love and mercy. He risked everything so that others might live, making decisions only a person with true Gryffindor daring could make. It is easy to dismiss Snape as a Slytherin for his cunning and ambition, but these qualities were in service of something greater than personal advancement. He used his guile and deception to fool the Dark Lord himself, protecting Harry, the very child who reminded him of his failure to save Lily. Snape's bitterness toward Harry was rooted in this self-loathing. He saw in Harry the features of the man Lily chose over him, but he also saw her eyes. Those green eyes were a constant, painful reminder of the promise he made to Dumbledore to keep the boy alive at any cost. This promise was not driven by duty alone, but by love. "Look at me," he whispered as he died, wanting only to see Lily's eyes one last time. Even in his final moment, it was love that guided him. His Patronus is perhaps the most vivid proof of this love's depth. The Patronus is a spell of pure, positive memory, a reflection of the caster's most cherished emotion. When Snape produced the silver doe, the same as Lily's, it was not a calculated move to impress Dumbledore. It was an instinctive, unchanging expression of his truest self. No matter what he became, the love he held for her defined him. The fact that it never changed demonstrates a singular constancy that even Gryffindor's bravest would struggle to match. Dumbledore himself recognized this when he asked that telling question about time, marveling at the unwavering nature of Snape's heart. In many ways, Snape's love was sacrificial in a manner that resonates deeply with Gryffindor values. He knew that Lily would never return his feelings after he called her a mudblood, and he accepted her choice to marry James Potter, the man Snape despised. Yet he did not try to win her back or undermine her happiness. He did not turn away in fury at her rejection, though he had every reason to. Instead, he tried to protect what she loved most, her son, even though that son was a living reminder of everything he lost. This self-denial, this willingness to hurt himself to keep Harry safe, speaks of a bravery beyond mere sword-wielding. It is the bravery of the heart. One might argue that Snape's rage, cruelty, and prejudices disqualified him from Gryffindor's ranks. But Gryffindors are not saints. They are people whose emotions are fierce and whose loyalty can be both a gift and a curse. Sirius Black, a Gryffindor to the core, was reckless, cruel to his enemies, and dangerously impulsive. Harry himself was stubborn, often arrogant, and sometimes needlessly combative. Gryffindor House celebrates those whose hearts burn with passion, even if that passion sometimes blinds them. Snape's cruelty toward students, especially Harry, is the tragic result of his lifelong bitterness and pain, yet it does not negate the fierce, protective love that defined his truest self. Number 14. Ability to act alone. Severus. Snape's path through life was shaped by a ferocity of will that few could match, a quality that would have fit the mold of a Gryffindor as much as that of a Slytherin. Though the Hat chose Slytherin for his cunning and ambition, Snape displayed time and again the Gryffindor trait of acting alone when it would have been wiser to seek help. The ultimate choice that defined his life was not born of friendship, loyalty, or ambition for power, but from a personal moral reckoning that he shouldered in complete solitude. When he realized that his words had led Voldemort to target Lily Potter, he did not consult friends, for he had none he could trust. He went alone to Dumbledore, offering his service with these stark words. "Hide them all, then. Keep her, them, safe. Please." This was not the act of a schemer in a circle of allies, but of a man who saw no way out except to beg the mercy of someone he barely respected. Snape's solitude was never passive. It was a deliberate choice he maintained throughout his double life. Even when he held the trust of Dumbledore, he did not share the weight of his role with anyone else. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, readers see him isolated in the worst way, knowing that every Death Eater around him suspected him, that the Order distrusted him, and that even the students he taught despised him. He carried this burden without protest, without hope of vindication, knowing that his reputation would be left in ruins. Gryffindors often charge into danger, sometimes foolishly. Snape accepted danger not in a single act of bravery, but as a way of life, choosing to live hated and alone because it was the only path he believed would save Harry Potter. His entire mission as a double agent was conducted without support or comfort. He never attempted to recruit allies within the Death Eaters or the Order. His secrecy was so complete that Sirius Black, a Gryffindor through and through, hated him passionately without suspecting the truth. The Marauders had once prided themselves on their unity, their brotherhood against all threats, but Snape had no one to share his mission with. He was the embodiment of a Gryffindor's tragic flaw, the belief that the burden of heroism is one to be carried alone. He chose to act as Voldemort's servant in the eyes of the world, knowing he would have to lie to every person. He met even those he wished to save. It was not mere self-sacrifice, but an almost suicidal courage that kept him on this path. When Dumbledore ordered him to kill him to spare Draco Malfoy's soul, Snape did not hesitate, though he loathed the act. "Severus, please." Those words sealed his fate. He became a murderer in the eyes of all, losing even the thin hope that Harry might someday understand him. The Gryffindor Code demands that you risk everything for what is right, but Snape risked more: his soul, his reputation, his very identity. His mission was so deeply buried that even when Harry used Snape's memories to discover the truth, he did so only after Snape's death. Snape's bravery was all the more stark for its lack of reward. He did not expect thanks or forgiveness. He did not imagine that Harry would ever see him as anything but a monster. And yet, he continued, guarding Harry at Hogwarts, making the unbreakable vow with Narcissa Malfoy to protect Draco, knowing full well it might doom him. He acted because he saw it as his duty. He did not trumpet his sacrifice. He hid it so effectively that no one would even suspect there was a sacrifice. When Dumbledore asked, "You disgust me," in private, Snape did not defend himself. He accepted the hatred as his penance. In that sense, Snape's story is a Gryffindor tragedy, as much as it is a Slytherin one. He had the lion's heart, willing to go to any length to defend the innocent, but without the Gryffindor gift of friendship. His solitude was not only tactical, but emotional. He cut himself off from any possibility of kindness because he believed it was necessary to succeed. This made him cruel at times, even to Harry, whom he was sworn to protect. His teaching was harsh, even vindictive, not because he loved cruelty, but because he was locked in a battle between what he was forced to appear to be and what he truly was. In The Half-Blood Prince, his bitterness is laid bare when he spits, "Don't call me coward!" to Harry, revealing how deeply he resented the accusations of those who did not understand the cost of his choices. Number 15. Sense of justice. Severus Snape was not a man anyone would call gentle, yet there was something undeniably fierce and upright about the way he chose his battles. He stood in Dumbledore's office, black robes billowing like a storm cloud, eyes glinting with rage and grief as he demanded, "Hide them all, then," in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. That moment was not simply the panic of a man who had lost the love of his life. It was the scream of someone who could not abide the injustice of her murder. He did not ask for forgiveness, nor did he pretend to be good. He demanded action against evil. In that alone, he showed the marrow-deep sense of justice that would have made any Gryffindor proud. His contempt for Peter Pettigrew was more than personal hatred. It was a condemnation of betrayal itself. Snape despised weakness when it was allied with treachery. He would have preferred open enmity to the simpering cowardice of the man who sold James and Lily to Voldemort. Even while working as a double agent, Snape made no secret of this hatred, and his disgust burned all the brighter because Pettigrew never paid for his crime in the way Snape believed he should. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Pettigrew is revealed, Snape's fury is absolute, not because he was wronged, but because the very notion of friendship had been perverted into murder. He understood that betrayal destroys the foundation of any decent society, and in this he was utterly uncompromising. Snape's decision to change sides was not simply for Lily. It was because the murder of innocents offended something primal in him. He was a Death Eater, yes, but he was not blind. He saw the murder of a child foretold, and it sickened him. "You disgust me," he said to Dumbledore, when the headmaster suggested he cared only for Lily's life and not for Harry's. This raw, biting exchange in The Half-Blood Prince revealed that Snape, for all his cynicism, could not stomach selective compassion. He hated Voldemort not only for killing Lily, but for mocking the very idea of mercy. Even when forced into the service of Dumbledore, Snape did so with a savage sense of moral reckoning. His teaching style is often cited as evidence of cruelty. But if we peel back the layers, we see a man who enforced rules with unrelenting precision. He demanded perfection in potion-making because mistakes could kill. He knew the price of error in the dark arts, and so he did not coddle anyone. In the Order of the Phoenix, when he trained Harry in occlumency, his coldness was deliberate. He would not risk Voldemort reading Harry's mind. It was an ugly lesson, but Snape was no fool. He understood that learning to defend oneself against evil was not a polite exercise but an act of survival. His harshness was not blind cruelty but a desperate attempt to save a boy who reminded him of his own failures. Snape's membership in the Order of the Phoenix was another testament to his unwillingness to stand by while the world burned. He did not have to risk his life delivering information about the Death Eater's plans, but he did. He worked tirelessly, passing along Voldemort's movements, not because he loved the Order's members, many of whom despised him, but because it was right. When Dumbledore trusted Snape to do the hardest task of all, killing him to protect Draco, Snape did not do it out of love or even loyalty to Dumbledore, but because he understood that someone had to bear that stain to save a boy's soul. Gryffindor bravery is often praised for its flashy heroics, but Snape's was the type that demanded the sacrifice of one's honor for the sake of others. Even the way Snape treated Draco Malfoy revealed an unexpected fairness. While he had clear favoritism toward his house, he did not let Draco become a murderer. He watched over him, tried to dissuade him from Voldemort's task, and ultimately took the burden upon himself. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore says, "You alone know whether it is in Draco's nature to carry out Voldemort's wishes." Snape, seeing the boy's terror and his hesitations, made the choice to act. He showed that real justice is not simply punishing the guilty, but protecting the vulnerable from becoming monsters themselves. Snape's Patronus, a silver doe, was not merely a sign of unchanging love, but also of fidelity to a promise. When he showed it to Dumbledore in the Deathly Hallows, he was revealing that everything he had done was not for personal gain, but for a vow to keep Lily's son safe. It was an act of moral accounting that transcended even death. He did not claim to be good, did not ask for redemption, but he would not break his word. That was not Slytherin cunning, but Gryffindor righteousness, an unbreakable commitment to a single, righteous cause, no matter the cost. Snape's sense of justice was also rooted in his hatred of Voldemort's ideology. He may have once been seduced by promises of power, but he came to see the truth, that Voldemort cared for nothing but his own supremacy, at any cost. Snape's reaction was not mild regret, but venomous rage. He did not simply turn spy, he became Voldemort's most dangerous enemy from within. He spent years undermining Voldemort's plans, feeding the Order crucial intelligence. This was not the work of a man who wanted safety for himself. It was the work of someone determined to see justice done, even if he burned with it. Number 16. Stubbornness. Severus Snape's unbending will was a flame that refused to die, no matter how fierce the winds that threatened to snuff it out. He chose his course the moment he knelt before Albus Dumbledore, begging for Lily Potter's life. When Dumbledore answered that he would do what he could for the child, but could not save the mother, Snape did not turn away. He did not change his demand or seek easier bargains. He accepted the deal that would cost him everything and chained himself to a promise that would never let him rest. J.K. Rowling writes in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, "You disgust me," said Dumbledore, and Snape made no attempt to defend himself. He simply demanded protection for Lily's son. This scene shows a man who would not back down from a vow he had chosen. It was Gryffindor's brand of stubbornness in its rawest, harshest form, and Snape wore it like armor. Even in the dim candlelight of the headmaster's office, Snape's path did not waver. Dumbledore laid the plan before him, to carry a lie on his tongue, to convince Voldemort of absolute loyalty, to betray every moral certainty he had once held. He would have to murder the only man who trusted him and ensure Draco Malfoy's innocence was preserved. A Slytherin might have refused on principle, calculating the risk and profit, but Snape's answer was steel-edged certainty. He would do it. "You alone know whether it will harm your soul," Dumbledore warned him. But Snape did not debate. He accepted the burden as his due punishment and his only road to redemption. the unwavering commitment to. Despite its horror, is precisely the reckless courage the Sorting Hat prizes in Gryffindor. Snape's unrelenting nature was not simply private resolve, it shaped every encounter he had. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, he faced Dolores Umbridge, who demanded Veritaserum to interrogate Harry. Snape refused her directly, risking his position and safety, saying coldly, "You are running low, I suppose?" and dismissing her with icy contempt. He knew she was a threat to his cover, a pawn of the Ministry. He could have lied, offered some compromise, avoided notice. Instead, he chose the head-on collision. Gryffindors were known for their inability to back away from confrontation, and Snape's refusal to appease Umbridge is a perfect testament to that. At the heart of his most dangerous work lay the occlumency lessons with Harry. Snape, who despised James Potter's son with venomous resentment, was ordered to teach the boy to block Voldemort from his mind. He could not have hated this duty more, yet he did not refuse it. He tried repeatedly, despite Harry's insufferable stubbornness and their mutual hatred. This is where Snape's own unyielding will clashed with Harry's. Neither would bend. Their sessions descended into disaster precisely because both of them had that same Gryffindor-like refusal to yield. Snape's failure here wasn't a lack of trying, but a testament to how deeply his own unbending nature could become self-defeating, a hallmark of Gryffindor's most tragic heroes. His entire life became a tightrope of deadly commitments. When Voldemort returned, Snape did not hesitate to retake his place among the Death Eaters. He lied with unblinking precision, standing in a circle of murderers who would kill him for the slightest hint of betrayal. He endured the Dark Lord's suspicion, the Carrow's foul cruelty, and Bellatrix Lestrange's constant doubts. Any normal person would have cracked or fled. A calculating Slytherin might have searched for a safer path or switched allegiance again, but Snape chose his side and never wavered. It was an act of suicidal loyalty so fierce it could only belong to someone with Gryffindor's trademark defiance of reason. When Dumbledore's hand blackened and death became inevitable, Snape faced the ultimate test. Dumbledore ordered him to kill. Snape resisted, begged for another solution, but when Dumbledore insisted, Snape obeyed. He did not do this because he wanted power over Hogwarts. He loathed every moment of it. The burden was corrosive, but he carried it because it was necessary. Even when Draco lowered his wand, shivering with the knowledge of what he could not do, Snape did what needed to be done. The text in Half-Blood Prince says, Avada Kedavra, and the green light lit the tower. It wasn't cunning that led him there, it was duty, and an unbreakable promise. In Deathly Hallows, Snape's control over Hogwarts was not self-indulgence but martyrdom. He patrolled corridors that ran with the blood of Muggle-born students, enduring the hatred of every child he protected from the Carrow's worst punishments. He refused to abandon his post, no matter how much the children hated and feared him. McGonagall herself realized the truth too late when she faced him in battle, and he deflected her attacks away from the students. He would not draw blood even then. That unwavering commitment to protecting them, even at the cost of his own reputation, was pure Gryffindor stubbornness. He would not leave, would not yield, would not break. Snape's death itself was a testament to that iron will. He did not beg Voldemort for mercy, did not offer new bargains or try to escape. He understood his role was ending, and he accepted it with grim resolve. Even when Nagini's fangs sliced his throat and his lifeblood pooled on the floor of the shrieking shack, Snape's only demand was that Harry take his memories. He had one last duty to fulfill, and he would not die until he completed it. Rowling writes, take it. In Deathly Hallows, he forced out the words even as he drowned in his own blood. That is not self-preservation. That is pure, unbreakable purpose. His hatred of Harry was not simple, petty resentment, but a reflection of his stubborn inability to forgive himself. Every time he saw Harry, he saw Lily's eyes. He never softened, never excused himself, never sought comfort. He chose the punishment of living with that grief, wearing it like a hair shirt for decades. Gryffindors are known for their self-inflicted burdens. Think of Sirius Black's reckless quest for revenge, or Harry's refusal to let anyone else fight his battles. Snape's insistence on living with the consequences of his mistakes was exactly that sort of punishing, self-destructive pride. Even his mastery of potions was marked by this same iron determination. He rewrote instructions in his old textbook, not for cleverness alone, but because he refused to accept imperfection. He found better ways. He experimented ruthlessly. In Half-Blood Prince, Harry sees sectum sempra for enemies scrawled in the margins, evidence of a mind that would not leave any question unexplored, no matter how dark. That same tireless pursuit of mastery drove him to become one of the most dangerous wizards of his age. Gryffindors are often reckless in their curiosity and unwillingness to stop pushing boundaries. Snape was no different. His final legacy was one of stubborn secrecy. He refused to let the world know his role. He let Harry hate him, let his students curse his memory, let McGonagall spit his name with fury. A Slytherin might have arranged for the truth to come out in a way that salvaged reputation or ensured legacy. Snape did not. He did not want thanks, praise, or redemption. He wanted only to keep his word to Lily Potter. This refusal to explain himself was not cunning, but a rigid, Gryffindor-like refusal to compromise even on pride. He would die the villain if that's what it took to keep his vow. Snape's treatment of students in his classroom, while undeniably cruel, also revealed his unyielding standards. He did not flatter or coddle. He demanded absolute precision and punished sloppiness without mercy. Neville Longbottom, in particular, bore the brunt of this harshness. Yet even there was a twisted kind of Gryffindor logic. He would not lie to them about danger or accept anything less than excellence. His was the unrelenting, almost sadistic honesty of someone who would not sugarcoat the world to make it easier to bear. Gryffindor heroes are often those who challenge others to rise to the occasion, even if their methods are brutal. Snape's worst traits, bitterness, cruelty, sarcasm, were not separate from his unbending will, but a consequence of it. He refused to let go of old grudges, refused to heal, refused to forgive himself or others. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when he finally confronts Sirius Black, there is no question of negotiation or compromise. He is going to see Black kissed by a Dementor if it kills him. He had chosen that goal and would not be turned aside, even by Harry's pleas. This isn't cunning, it's obsession. It's the same inability to let go that defines Gryffindor's darkest flaws. In many ways, Snape was a tragic Gryffindor in Slytherin's clothes. The hat itself said it takes bravery to stand up to your enemies, but even more to stand up to your friends. Snape did both. He stood against Voldemort, his old comrades, and even Dumbledore when he felt the old wizard went too far. He was not subtle about it. He raged, cursed, and refused to obey unless convinced it was necessary. He was the lion forced to wear a serpent's skin to survive, but the claws were always there, unsheathed and ready. His loyalty was absolute and savage, his courage cold and unyielding. Dumbledore saw this too. He did not choose Snape to protect Harry simply because he was available, but because he knew Snape would never break a vow once given. He trusted Snape with the life of the boy who lived because he saw the same terrible, self-consuming loyalty that Gryffindors are known for. "You are the bravest man I ever knew," Harry tells Snape in Deathly Hallows. It is not a compliment to Slytherin cunning, but to Gryffindor heart. In the end, Snape proved that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to yield to it. Number 17. Honor. Severus. Snape's life unfolded like a tapestry woven with dark threads, yet within its somber weave glimmered the unmistakable strands of a unique and unyielding honor. The common image of Gryffindor is one of chivalry wrapped in the bright fire of courage, but Snape's own brand of honor burned just as hot, if in a more hidden and unforgiving way. His promise to Albus Dumbledore to protect Harry Potter was no convenient act of redemption. It was a binding oath that he upheld at the expense of his own dignity, safety, and peace. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells him, "You have kept him alive so that he can die at the proper moment," revealing that Snape's service was no gentle guardianship but a brutal sacrifice. Though he hated James Potter and saw echoes of his old tormentor in Harry, Snape refused to break his word. He did not allow bitterness to override duty. He shielded Harry from curses, guided him with cryptic advice, and even accepted the suspicion and scorn that came with appearing to be his enemy. It was a grim code of honor, but a code all the same. This same sense of honor tethered Snape to the memory of Lily Evans long after her death. He never attempted to absolve himself of guilt for betraying her trust by carrying the prophecy to Voldemort. In the Deathly Hallows, when Dumbledore suggested that Snape might care only about Harry because of Lily, Snape conjured his silver doe Patronus and answered in a single word, "Always." There was no pretense that his remorse had an endpoint, nor did he attempt to twist his shame into self-pity. He did not try to erase his past or claim he had been misunderstood. Gryffindor honor was about facing one's mistakes with open eyes, and Snape did this with brutal honesty. Even his role as a double agent demanded a ferocious kind of valor and integrity. Gryffindors like Sirius Black might have fought with swords drawn in the open, but Snape's battlefield was shadowed corridors and whispered secrets. For years, he walked a knife's edge between Voldemort and Dumbledore, despised by both sides for different reasons. In the Goblet of Fire, when Karkaroff showed him the fading dark mark, Snape did not feign ignorance or fear. He calmly showed his own mark and concealed nothing from Dumbledore, though he risked being discovered by the Death Eaters. He could have escaped, could have abandoned the Order and preserved his life, but his code forbade cowardice in any form. His honor was an anchor that held him steady in the hurricane of the war. Perhaps the most revealing example of Snape's hidden Gryffindor qualities lay in his relentless commitment to the safety of Hogwarts itself. When Dumbledore was dying, Snape agreed to kill him to spare Draco Malfoy from committing murder. It was not an act of ambition or self-interest. In The Half-Blood Prince, the narrative shows him standing on the astronomy tower, wand raised, and he performs the killing curse as Dumbledore pleads silently. He does not flinch. It was a moment of stark, harrowing courage. He knew he would be reviled as a traitor, loathed by everyone who believed in the headmaster. He knew that even among the Death Eaters he would be neither trusted nor safe. Yet he did it because he had sworn to protect Draco and to preserve Dumbledore's plan. He sacrificed his honor in the eyes of the world to maintain it in the privacy of his own conscience. Snape's teaching style, often cruel and sarcastic, concealed a fierce loyalty to the standards he set. He despised mediocrity and demanded rigor. When Hermione Granger brewed the draught of living death perfectly in their first potions lesson of 6th year, he acknowledged her skill with a curt nod, though he offered no praise. To some this seemed petty, but it was also an unyielding respect for true talent, regardless of house. In Gryffindor fashion, he prized integrity of craft. Above popularity, he refused to flatter students for the sake of appearing likable, much like Professor McGonagall, who also demanded excellence without compromise. Snape's honor also manifested in the way he guarded information that could have protected him from suspicion. He never revealed to Harry or anyone else that he had been the one to send the counter-curse to save Harry's life during the first Quidditch match. In the Sorcerer's Stone, Harry only learns much later from Dumbledore that Snape had risked exposure to prevent Quirrell's sabotage. A lesser man would have proclaimed his innocence at every turn. Snape Let the world believe the worst because he valued the promise he made over the opinions of others. This was Gryffindor valor of the most punishing kind, the refusal to surrender one's principles to salvage reputation. When he learned that Voldemort intended to kill Harry as a baby, Snape did not merely weep for Lily. He went to Dumbledore to beg for her life. In the Deathly Hallows, Dumbledore recounts how Snape's grief was so consuming that he consented to protect the child of his rival for the sake of the woman he loved. It was not a transaction of absolution, it was a penance he imposed upon himself, knowing no act of service could undo his betrayal. To live every day with that knowledge and still persist in the work of defending Hogwarts and the boy was a testament to an inner discipline as fierce as any Gryffindor's battle lust. Snape never allowed himself the comfort of easy excuses. He could have blamed Voldemort, could have claimed coercion or ignorance. Instead, he accepted that he had been the instrument of Lily's death. His Patronus remained a doe because he refused to forget. In Gryffindor terms, this was the lion-hearted refusal to let memory fade into convenient oblivion. His private shame was a burden he bore with the same grim resolve as Neville Longbottom's stand against Voldemort. It was simply a different battlefield. Even the act of protecting the sword of Gryffindor for Harry showed Snape's respect for Gryffindor ideals. He knew that the sword would be needed to destroy Horcruxes, so he risked crossing into the Forest of Dean to hide it in a frozen lake. The portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black reported Harry and Hermione's location, and Snape left the sword without seeking gratitude or acknowledgement. In the Deathly Hallows, he ensured that his aid remained anonymous, so the trio would not question its purpose. This unheralded bravery was the kind that Gryffindors understood best, doing the right thing without expecting to be celebrated. Snape's final moments revealed a man utterly consumed by his code of honor. When Voldemort ordered Nagini to strike him, Snape did not beg for his life. He thought only of Harry. With his dying strength, he summoned the memories Harry would need to understand the truth. His last request was not for pity, but for Harry to look at him so that just once he could see Lily's eyes. It was not triumph or vindication he sought, but the quiet fulfillment of a promise kept. His final act was as brave as any sword-wielding duel. In many ways, Snape's life mirrored the darker side of Gryffindor's creed. He was not joyful or noble in an obvious sense. He was savage in his loyalties, unforgiving in his standards, and merciless in his self-reproach. Yet, like Godric Gryffindor himself, he valued honor above safety, integrity above ease, and truth above the comfort of delusion. His ferocity was simply turned inward as much as outward, a crucible that consumed nearly every gentle impulse he possessed. Some might argue that Snape's bitterness made him unworthy of Gryffindor, but it was precisely that bitterness which forged his unbreakable sense of duty. He was willing to be loathed, willing to be called coward, willing to stand alone, so long as he did not fail the vow he had made. Even the cruelest Gryffindor, the most severe and unyielding, could not deny the courage it took to live as Snape did. He was proof that honor sometimes wears a black cloak rather than scarlet robes. His life was a long testament to the reality that valor and honor are not always clothed in cheerfulness or grand declarations. They are often quieter, grimmer forces that demand more from a man than the world will ever see. Severus Snape lived by a code that many could never understand, but in the end he did not betray it. In that sense, he was as worthy of Gryffindor as any hero whose name was etched into the house cup. Number 18. Willingness to be misunderstood. Severus Snape often embodied a darkness that made it easy to dismiss him as a bitter, petty man, a figure who delighted in the misery of his students and carried ancient grudges as though they were sacred heirlooms. Yet buried beneath the layers of resentment and cruelty lay a singular, towering act of courage that rivaled anything done by the most lion-hearted Gryffindors. This was the courage to live unloved, to carry the burden of suspicion and loathing every day without relief, simply because he believed it was right. Few characters in the wizarding world illustrate this paradox better than Snape, whose ultimate sacrifice was not just his life, but the possibility that he would ever be understood. He became the villain in a story where he could have been the redeemed, accepted hero, and he did so willingly because he valued Lily Potter's memory more than he valued the world's approval. When Albus Dumbledore first trusted Snape with the most dangerous double life imaginable, he warned him that no one must ever suspect the truth. "In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows," Dumbledore said, with that grave, knowing calm, "you are prepared to risk your life to ensure the boy fulfills his destiny?" And Snape, despite everything, did not hesitate. He accepted the role of the monster because it was the only way to protect Harry. This readiness to appear cruel, even evil, was not a Slytherin's cunning but a Gryffindor's moral determination. Where ambition ends, self-sacrifice begins. And Snape walked that line with a dignity that no one recognized. Harry himself never understood Snape's true allegiance until it was too late. All those years of scathing insults, the cold disdain in Snape's black eyes, the endless belittling, none of it was the full truth. Every word of contempt had hidden a deeper vow, the promise he made when he held Lily Potter's lifeless body in Godric's Hollow. This was a promise so consuming that he willingly erased any chance of redemption in Harry's eyes. It is almost unbearable to imagine how much strength it took to face Lily's son every day and let that boy believe he was nothing more than a spiteful, hateful man. Gryffindor bravery is often thought of as rushing into battle, but Snape's was the steadier, more merciless variety, the bravery. To let oneself be the villain if it served a greater good. He never tried to correct the narrative. When Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and the other members of the Order of the Phoenix doubted his motives, Snape responded with venom rather than defense. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore revealed that the time was nearing for Draco Malfoy to attempt Voldemort's task, Snape did not once plead for understanding. He only demanded that Dumbledore remember their agreement. He accepted that he would be accused of betrayal, that every friend he had ever known would see him as a murderer when the time came. Even then, his only thought was whether he could still protect Draco from becoming a killer. "I have promised," he reminded Dumbledore. There was no pretense of glory in his tone, only the blunt resignation of a man prepared to shoulder the vilest burden alone. Snape's hatred of James Potter was genuine, and it would have been the simplest thing in the world to let that hatred overshadow his commitment. Many Gryffindors, with all their loud declarations of courage, would have faltered under such a conflict of loyalties. Yet Snape did not. He despised James, and yet guarded James's son with every ounce of his strength. In The Order of the Phoenix, when Dolores Umbridge demanded the truth serum to interrogate Harry, Snape refused her with a coldness that belied how closely he was watching over the boy. Every time he blocked a hex or steered suspicion elsewhere, he made the same choice again, to protect the child of the man he loathed, because Lily's memory demanded no less. Perhaps the most defining evidence of Snape's Gryffindor spirit was his willingness to die without absolution. He knew that if Voldemort fell, no one would thank him. No statues would be built in his honor. No child would whisper his name with admiration. He would be remembered as a traitor, or at best, a man who had played both sides for his own gain. In The Deathly Hallows, the moment of his death was brutal and without ceremony. As Nagini struck, Snape looked into Harry's eyes not with hatred, but with the last shred of his humanity. "Look at me," he whispered, craving only a final glimpse of Lily's eyes before the darkness swallowed him. That moment contained the full measure of his courage, the acceptance that this was the closest he would ever come to forgiveness. The House of Gryffindor never required perfection. It required only that its members be willing to risk everything for what they believed was right. Snape's entire existence after Lily's death was one long act of penance. He never asked for sympathy, never tried to soften the truth. He was content to be misunderstood. Even when he revealed his Patronus, Lily's silver doe, to Dumbledore, there was no plea for pity. "Always," he said, and in that one word all his contradictions fell away. His heart had been broken, but it still led him to do the bravest thing any man can do, to live hated in service of love. The example of Severus Snape complicates the idea that Gryffindor courage is always bright and noble. Sometimes it is as dark as night, a hidden sacrifice that leaves no space for gratitude. Snape's choice to live as a spy meant never having the comfort of allies. Even among the Death Eaters he was regarded with suspicion. Voldemort himself trusted no one, least of all the man who had once turned spy to warn Dumbledore. Snape carried this constant threat of exposure like a chain around his neck, knowing that at any moment his deception could collapse. The fact that he maintained it until the very end speaks of an iron will that would have made Godric Gryffindor himself pause in respect. He could have fled. He could have abandoned the Order, vanished into obscurity, and left Harry to his fate. Yet Snape never once considered saving himself. He stayed within Voldemort's circle, risking torture and death because it was the only place from which he could do the most good. Even when Dumbledore was gone, Snape kept faith with the plan. He protected the students at Hogwarts as best he could, without revealing himself, standing alone at the summit of a war that seemed unwinnable. This was not ambition. This was the harshest, loneliest courage a man can know. Some argue that Snape's bitterness and cruelty disqualify him from being called brave, that his venom toward Harry and others proves he lacked nobility. But bravery does not require a gentle nature. Snape's was the bravery of endurance. He endured every insult, every suspicion, every heartbreak, and still did his duty. When Minerva McGonagall challenged him in the Great Hall, forcing him to flee before the final battle, Snape did not retaliate. He deflected her spells without harming her. Even then, his first instinct was to protect the people he had been guarding in secret for so long. That restraint was itself an act of grace. In the end, Harry came to recognize this truth. He named his own son Albus Severus Potter, telling the boy that his namesake was the bravest man I ever knew. That admission, so simple and understated, is the final proof that Snape's legacy was never about glory. It was about a quiet, relentless courage that asked for nothing in return. Gryffindor courage, at its purest, is not the roar of a lion in triumph. It is the silent, unthanked endurance of a man who chooses the harder path because it is the right one. Snape's life was a testament to the idea that real bravery means never expecting applause. He chose to walk alone into the shadows, to be the villain in everyone's eyes, simply because it was necessary. When the time came for Harry to see the memories Snape had left behind, he finally understood the terrible cost of that choice. He saw a man who had loved Lily Evans with such total devotion that he would rather be hated forever than fail to keep her son safe. He saw a life defined not by spite, but by sacrifice. That sacrifice is what makes Snape, more than almost any other character, a figure of true Gryffindor valor. He showed that the courage to be misunderstood, to let the world revile you, to stand alone in the darkness with no hope of recognition, can be the most powerful kind of bravery there is. In his own tormented way, Severus Snape was a lion hidden in a serpent's skin, and the world will never fully grasp the magnitude of his choice. Number 19. Capacity for compassion. Severus. Snape was a man whose every gesture seemed calculated to instill fear, whose voice dripped sarcasm so caustic it left scars on teenage pride, whose black eyes seemed to miss nothing except perhaps kindness. Yet those who looked closer, and few ever dared, would have found a capacity for compassion so fierce it bordered on self-destruction. It was not Gryffindor's bright, roaring heroism that he embodied, but the quieter, often cruelly hidden kind that dared to hurt itself so that others might survive. He was, after all, the man who chose to guard Harry Potter's life for years, even as he let the boy believe him a sadist. "Look at me," he whispered with dying breath, a plea to be seen at last, not as the enemy, but as the man who had loved so deeply he was willing to be despised forever. Snape's cruelty to Neville Longbottom has long been held up as proof of his unredeemable nature, and it is true that his lessons with Neville were a theatre of humiliation. But those who see only sadism miss the possibility that Snape's anger was rooted in fear. For Neville was almost the chosen one. The prophecy might have named him instead of Harry. If Voldemort had chosen to attack the Longbottoms, the war might have ended differently or not at all. In Neville, Snape saw a fragile hinge upon which destiny had turned, a reminder of Lily's needless death and his own catastrophic mistake in delivering the prophecy to Voldemort. Snape's disdain was not only contempt, but a form of terrified rejection of a possibility too painful to bear. His harshness was his refusal to admit that Neville's existence was a cruel cosmic near-miss, one that he would have given anything to undo. Snape's compassion was rarely gentle. When Albus Dumbledore lay dying from the curse of the ring, it was Snape who tirelessly contained the dark magic in his arm, prolonging his friend's life. "You alone know whether it will harm your soul to help an old man avoid pain and humiliation," Dumbledore told him. And Snape did know it did harm him, and yet he did it anyway. He agreed to deliver the killing blow not because he lacked mercy, but because he understood its brutal cost. By sparing Draco Malfoy the act of murder, Snape was taking on himself a burden that would follow him to his grave. In doing so, he performed one of the most Gryffindor-like acts imaginable, the willingness to do what was necessary to save another's soul, no matter the price to his own. When Draco Malfoy received the Dark Mark, he was 16 years old, sullen, arrogant, and desperate to prove himself. Voldemort gave him the impossible task of killing Dumbledore, a test he was meant to fail, dooming his entire family. Snape saw that boy's terror as clearly as he saw his swagger. He made an unbreakable vow to Narcissa Malfoy, promising to protect Draco and finish the task if Draco could not. Some call it self-interest or cunning, but it was an act of profound compassion. Snape did not let Draco kill. He took that choice, that ruin, upon himself. "Avada Kedavra," he said, and watched the world hate him for it. It was not Slytherin ambition that guided him then, but a sacrificial courage worthy of Godric Gryffindor himself. Snape's protection of Harry Potter was a cruel sort of mercy, a grim and relentless guardianship that offered no comfort to the boy it shielded. But shield him it did. From the first year when he muttered counter-curses to save Harry's life at the Quidditch match, to the final year when he fed the Order of the Phoenix crucial intelligence, Snape's loyalty was unwavering. "He does not know," Dumbledore told Snape. "He has no idea." Indeed, Harry never knew, not until the end, that the man who spat venom at him was also the one who saved him over and over. Snape let the boy hate him, let everyone hate him, if it meant Harry would live. That brand of uncelebrated sacrifice, invisible to those it served, was a flame no less bright for being hidden. The word compassion often conjures images of gentleness, of warm smiles and soothing words. Snape's version was forged in the fires of regret and obsession, twisted by bitterness but no less real. He understood suffering better than anyone because he lived it every day. He lost the only woman he ever loved and carried the blame like a hair shirt. He saw the world as a cruel place and armed himself with cruelty to survive it. Yet in that armored heart was a relentless determination to spare others the same fate. His compassion was brutal, sharp-edged and unrelenting. It was a promise made over Lily's dead body that he would protect her son, even if that meant becoming a monster in his eyes. Snape's coldness was a mask, one he wore so convincingly that even those who should have known better were fooled. Dumbledore, however, always saw it. When he asked Snape to kill him, it was not because Snape was merciless, but because he knew Snape would be horrified at the task, yet do it anyway. "Severus, please," said Dumbledore in his final moment, and Snape obeyed. It was not the obedience of a servant, but the duty of a man who would sacrifice his own soul to save another from making that choice. Gryffindor courage is not only found in the heat of battle, but also in the quiet, ghastly acceptance of unbearable burdens for someone else's sake. Harry himself would eventually understand this. In the end, faced with Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest, Harry thought of Snape and named his son Albus Severus. "You were named for 2 headmasters of Hogwarts," he told the boy. "One of them was a Slytherin, and he was probably the bravest man I ever knew." The boy who once thought Snape was his worst tormentor came to see that the man's hatred had been a shroud thrown over his love. It was not kindness as Harry had imagined it should look, but it was a promise fulfilled with a courage Harry himself could barely comprehend. Snape's treatment of his students was undeniably harsh. He was unfair to Hermione Granger, whose brilliance he seemed to scorn, and cruel to Ron Weasley, who feared humiliation. But beneath the sneers and insults was a teacher who did not turn away from his duty, who taught them what they needed to know, even if it hurt. In the end, even Harry admitted Snape was a teacher who prepared them for war. The crueler truth was that Snape taught as he lived, convinced the world would devour the unprepared, determined that no child would fall to Voldemort because they were coddled. His compassion was not for their feelings but for their survival. He was also the man who brewed Wolfsbane potion for Remus Lupin. He despised Lupin for his friendship with Sirius Black and James Potter, and yet he brewed the complicated potion monthly, allowing a werewolf to keep his mind. He did it out of obligation, perhaps, but obligation is its own kind of compassion. He did not have to do it well, but he did. Lupin never forgot it. That quiet service, delivered without friendship or fondness, was none the less life-saving. It was Gryffindor bravery in Slytherin's colours, acting rightly despite personal hatred for the good of another. Snape's memories showed us that he could not bear to see Lily Evans called Mudblood. That single moment of shame haunted him forever. "I'm sorry," he whispered in his final confession, showing Harry the memories that revealed his true heart. His remorse was not performative, it ruled him. He joined Dumbledore not for power, but to atone. He turned against Voldemort knowing it could mean his death. That willingness to repent and act, no matter the cost, is not only Slytherin cunning but also Gryffindor valor. His entire life became penance, a testament to the power of compassion to transform the damned into the protector. When Snape asked Dumbledore to protect Lily, he begged, "Hide them all then, keep her, them, safe." He could not even say Harry's name at first, but over time Harry became the centre of his mission. He hated the boy's resemblance to James Potter, but watched over him with fierce vigilance. He insulted Harry, yes, but also ensured he learned occlumency, tried to shield him from the Dark Lord's influence. His lessons were harsh because the threat was real. Snape's way of caring was to demand the impossible so Harry might live. It was not the kindly hand of a friend, but the desperate push of someone who knew the price of failure. His final act was perhaps the most revealing. As Voldemort's snake bit him, Snape did not ask for forgiveness or comfort. He forced his memories on Harry, desperate that the boy know the truth. He wanted Harry to understand that he had been protected by a man he hated, that love could look like cruelty, that sacrifice could wear the face of a villain. Take them, please," he urged. It was the last act of a man who had spent his entire life denying himself absolution, but who needed Harry to see at last the shape of his compassion. That is why Severus Snape could have worn the red and gold of Gryffindor. Not because he was without flaws, he had many, but because he dared to act in spite of them. He saw horror and tried to hold it back with bare hands. He chose to bear hatred rather than let others suffer. His compassion was not gentle, but it was unbreakable. He was the man who saved Draco Malfoy's soul, who preserved Remus Lupin's dignity, who ensured Harry Potter lived to finish the fight. In another life, the Sorting Hat might have said Gryffindor, and Snape would have gone to war all the same, not for glory, but to spare the innocent no matter the cost. Number 20. Hatred of hypocrisy. Severus. Snape spent most of his life clad in the shadows of Slytherin's cold ambition, but there was a particular streak within him that seemed far more at home in the roaring firelight of Gryffindor Tower. His hatred of hypocrisy burned so brightly that it sometimes eclipsed his darker impulses. While many students and even professors whispered about his bitterness and cruelty, few paused to consider that this same unflinching disdain for pretense was a trait Gryffindor prized above nearly all else. When Snape looked upon the pureblood supremacists who lined up to kiss Voldemort's hem, he saw not conviction, but cowardice. He despised the Death Eaters who claimed to serve a cause, but really just longed for power and prestige. In his own bleak, uncompromising way, Snape refused to ever pretend he was something he wasn't, and that alone set him apart from the sycophants who defined much of Slytherin House during Voldemort's rise. Consider his view of Bellatrix Lestrange, who boasted endlessly of her loyalty to the Dark Lord. Her fanatic devotion was little more than an excuse to indulge her own sadism under the banner of righteousness. Snape never hid his disdain. Though Bellatrix accused him of lacking faith, of being self-serving, he countered her with the cold, simple truth. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, he reminded Narcissa Malfoy that he had done more for Voldemort than Bellatrix ever had. There was no false modesty in his words, but neither was there bragging. He was stating fact with the same severe clarity that had defined him since childhood. He did not embellish, and he did not grovel. His blunt honesty, even when it left a trail of bruised egos, was the very essence of Gryffindor forthrightness. Snape's contempt for Peter Pettigrew was another testament to his loathing of hypocrisy. While many Death Eaters welcomed Wormtail back into their ranks after he betrayed James and Lily Potter, Snape treated Pettigrew with unmasked disgust. He viewed Peter as the ultimate coward, a man too weak to stand by any principle at all. Even in the grim safety of Spinner's End, when Wormtail was assigned to spy on him, Snape made no attempt to disguise his revulsion. He spoke to Peter as if he were an uninvited rodent rather than a fellow servant of Voldemort. This total lack of pretense, this refusal to pretend camaraderie, showed that Snape valued an honest enmity more than a false alliance. If Gryffindors are known for anything, it is their belief that honesty, no matter how painful, is always preferable to deception. The moment Dumbledore fell, Snape's fierce hatred of duplicity reached its peak. While many in the Order of the Phoenix were left shattered and uncertain, Snape had no time for illusions. He fulfilled the unbreakable vow and killed Dumbledore, not because he was seduced by Voldemort's ideology, but because he had promised to protect Draco Malfoy from a murder that would destroy the boy's soul. There was nothing hidden about the violence of that moment. It was raw, terrible truth, the sort that Gryffindors would recognize as the price of courage. Snape was not interested in comforting lies or easy stories. He chose the path that would expose him to universal hatred, because it was the only honest way to preserve Dumbledore's plan. When he taught potions and later defense against the dark arts, Snape's lessons were often cruelly exacting, but even then he was never a hypocrite. He never pretended to admire students he did not respect. He never offered praise he did not mean. While Slughorn fawned over those with social or political promise, Snape reserved his acknowledgement only for genuine skill. Even his favoritism toward Draco Malfoy was not born of sycophancy. It was a calculated necessity, not a sentiment. In this he was the opposite of the manipulative Slytherin ideal. He did not flatter, he did not pretend, he expected the same candor from those around him, and if they failed to meet it, he had nothing but scorn for their pretensions. One of the most telling moments came when Harry accused Snape of cowardice. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Harry spat the word at him, convinced that Snape had betrayed his parents by revealing the prophecy. Snape's face twisted with such fury that it bordered on something close to anguish. "Don't call me coward!" he roared, the words more honest than any curse. That was the wound he could not bear, the accusation that he was false. For all his sins, cowardice and hypocrisy were not among them. Even when he was forced to act the spy, he did so with the knowledge that everyone he cared about would despise him for it. He never tried to justify himself or seek absolution. He lived in the grim reality that his choices would never be understood. Snape's relationship with Voldemort himself also revealed his contempt for the false purity the Dark Lord demanded. He served Voldemort because he had no other way to protect Lily's son, not because he believed in the cause. When Voldemort returned and the Death Eaters crawled back to his side, Snape alone maintained his careful, measured composure. He did not kneel with fervor or swear undying allegiance. His service was cold, transactional, and free of sentiment. In a way, it was more honest than Bellatrix's worship. He knew what Voldemort was and never pretended otherwise. There was no illusion of brotherhood in that circle, only the clear recognition of power, threat, and necessity. Even among Slytherins, Snape stood apart because he did not buy into their myth of selective loyalty. He did not curry favor with Lucius Malfoy or the Carrows. He did not pretend to share their glee at bloodshed. Instead, he held himself at a distance, too honest to fake enthusiasm, too proud to grovel. This isolation mirrored Gryffindor values more than Slytherin ones. For Gryffindors, self-respect matters more than strategic alliances. Snape's solitary defiance was the hidden ember of courage that aligned him with the lion more than the serpent. Throughout the war, Snape also showed a relentless dedication to truth, even when it endangered him. When he brought Dumbledore news of the prophecy, he did not hide from the consequences of his mistake. He did not disguise his remorse. He stood before the headmaster, exposed, and asked only that Lily be spared. There was no attempt to shift blame or minimize his role. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the memory reveals the raw confession. "Hide them all, then. Keep them safe, please." In that moment, he was stripped of all pretense, just a man with the desperate honesty of grief. It was the opposite of hypocrisy, and it was the first step toward the sacrifice that would define his life. Snape's bitterness was often mistaken for cruelty, but in reality, it was the shield he built to survive a world he could not respect. He could not abide the preening of Gilderoy Lockhart, the hypocrisy of the Ministry of Magic, or the smug piety of those who pretended to be above corruption. This profound revulsion for artifice made him blunt to the point of cruelty, but also fundamentally incapable of the deceit that many Slytherins wore like a second skin. Gryffindors were known to despise pretenders, and in this respect, Snape was their equal. Perhaps the most tragic proof of his Gryffindor spirit came in his final moments. As he lay dying, he did not use his last breath to ask for forgiveness or to rewrite his story. He simply demanded that Harry take his memories, evidence of the truth he had lived and the choices he had made. He needed no flattering epitaph, he needed no redemption song. He wanted only to be known for what he was, not what others claimed him to be. In that final act, Snape showed the same stark, unyielding integrity that Godric Gryffindor prized, a life lived without apology or disguise. Snape's life was a constant refusal to wear masks. He would never have knelt before Voldemort out of love or ideology, never have smiled politely at a colleague he despised, never have pretended to be something gentler or nobler than he was. When he loved absolutely. When he hated without pretense. This purity of feeling, however dark, was a kind of honesty Gryffindor would have understood. It was why Dumbledore trusted him when no one else did, because he knew Snape would never lie about what he truly believed. In the end, while the world might forever call him a Slytherin, there was a courage in Snape's loathing of hypocrisy that belonged in the House of Lions. He had the bravery to look at the darkness in himself and not pretend it was something else. He had the honesty to admit that he would never be free of bitterness or regret. He had the defiance to despise the polite deceits of the Death Eaters and to walk his lonely road without expecting admiration. In that way, Severus Snape embodied a Gryffindor's fearless contempt for lies, and it was the truest part of him. Number 21, endurance of pain. He walked the cold, torchlit corridors of Hogwarts like a man who had sold his soul for duty, shoulders stiff with burden no one else could see. Severus Snape was not simply cunning or clever. He was a man forged in agony and made strong enough to carry it without collapse. Many saw only his scowl and scathing words, forgetting the price he paid for every sneer. He lived in a world where death was daily currency, yet he never flinched from his role as a double agent. It was not Slytherin's self-preservation that made him endure Voldemort's icy rage, but a Gryffindor's unwavering resolve to let the Dark Lord scream in his face, read his thoughts, toy with his life, and still refuse to surrender the truth he guarded. His body may have remained still, his voice soft, but every moment was a battle in which he chose pain over betrayal. When Harry Potter, the boy he both loathed and protected, called him a coward, Snape said nothing. He did not explain himself. He did not point to the brand on his arm that burned at Voldemort's call, or to the memory of Lily Evans that bled afresh each time he saw her eyes in Harry's face. He swallowed that accusation like he swallowed everything, silently, privately, determined never to excuse himself. "Look, me," were his final words to Harry, an admission that cost him everything but demanded no apology. That act of dying while still guarding the truth was not the cautious plotting of a Slytherin, but the suicidal courage of a Gryffindor willing to let. The world hate him if it meant fulfilling the promise he made on bended knee before Dumbledore. Snape's stoicism was not cold indifference, but the shield of a man who could not afford to feel. He had mastered occlumency so thoroughly that even Voldemort, the most terrifying legilimens alive, was deceived. It was not just cunning, but pure, consuming self-control born of pain. When Voldemort pressed into his mind, snarling for the truth of the Elder Wand's loyalty, Snape held steady. Even as he died, his blood soaking the shrieking shack's filthy floor, he did not beg or curse. His last thoughts were not of revenge, but of Harry's eyes, proof that Lily had lived in some way. After all this time? Always. Those words were not the mark of cunning, but of a love so fierce it survived. Betrayal, death, and decades of misery. He chose to keep living in that torment day after day for the slimmest hope of defeating Voldemort. He endured daily humiliations among his colleagues, sneering at Trelawney's bumbling while knowing her prophecy had destroyed his life. He watched McGonagall's disapproval burn in her eyes, understanding she would never trust him fully, even as they fought for the same side. He taught dunderheaded students who whispered behind his back, mocking his greasy hair and foul temper, never suspecting he was the only shield between them and Voldemort's fury. He accepted that hatred. He invited it, because he believed the mission mattered more than his reputation. Gryffindors were known for their willingness to charge headlong into danger for a cause. Snape chose a slower martyrdom, one of quiet, grinding sacrifice, standing in front of the Dark Lord every day with a lie on his tongue and fear in his chest. Consider the moment Dumbledore demanded he kill him. Snape did not want to do it. The revulsion twisted his face when they argued in the tower. He pleaded, for once dropping the cool mask he wore so well. And yet when Dumbledore said, "Severus, please," Snape obeyed. He murdered the only man who truly knew the weight he carried because the plan demanded it. That was not ambition, but raw courage, to commit a soul-breaking sin for a greater good. He lived with that guilt like a chain around his neck, never shaking it off, never forgiving himself, because to do so would dishonor the sacrifice he had made. He carried that moral. Wound like a Gryffindor, carried a battle scar, visible only to those who knew where to look. Snape's service to Voldemort was its own agony. He stood among Death Eaters who had murdered, tortured, and maimed, pretending to be one of them. He watched Charity Burbage beg for her life and did nothing, knowing any slip would damn the entire war effort. "Severus, please," she cried, as Voldemort laughed. He flinched but did not move. That was not cunning, but the raw, unrelenting will to suffer anything to keep his cover. He accepted every drop of that blood on his conscience, not to gain power, but to defeat the man who had taken Lily. Gryffindors loved to boast of bravery, but Snape lived in a realm where even the idea of courage had to be buried under layers of horror to be effective. He also lived under Dumbledore's demands, suffering scorn and secrecy in service to a plan that offered no reward. The headmaster was not gentle with him. Dumbledore used him as the dagger hidden in his sleeve, asking for endless sacrifice without comfort or absolution. When Harry snarled at Snape for killing Dumbledore, the world accepted it. Snape didn't protest. He let them hate him because that hatred protected Harry. He sacrificed not only his life, but the very possibility of being seen as anything but a villain. Gryffindors sometimes died heroes. Snape chose to die a monster for the sake of a boy he claimed to despise. His strength lay in silence. He did not boast of his sacrifices. He did not demand recognition. "You have your mother's eyes," was all he could offer Harry, as his life bled away. That was not manipulation. It was all the humanity he had left, offered freely at the end. He did not flinch from death. He did not whimper or plead with Voldemort to spare him. He simply did what he had done all his life, endured. Gryffindors would have applauded such courage had it come with a roaring speech or a flashy duel. Snape offered none of that. His was the courage of a man who chose every day to live with unbearable pain for a goal greater than himself. Even his harshness in the classroom can be seen as an expression of this grim duty. He pushed students hard because he knew what failure meant. The wizarding world stood on a knife's edge. Any weakness could be exploited by Voldemort. So he snapped at Neville Longbottom, who could have been killed by a botched potion. He taunted Harry, trying to keep him cautious in a world that would devour the reckless. He was cruel, but it was the cruelty of a man who understood that kindness can be fatal when the enemy is watching. His was a lion's growl in Slytherin robes, intended to train cubs to survive. In the end, the tragedy of Snape is that he was denied the banner of Gryffindor, even though he lived its values in their most brutal form. He was never given a chance to be an open hero. He had to become a villain in the eyes of everyone who mattered, so that Harry could live. "Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love," Dumbledore said. Snape was the epitome of that principle. A man who had no love left for himself, who lived and died without pity, because it was the only way to keep his promise. Snape's pain was not a secret to Dumbledore, who alone saw the fire behind the mask. Dumbledore once said, "You are a braver man than I am, Severus." Those were not empty words. They were the confession of a man who understood the difference between dying once and dying every day. Snape chose to die every day. Every lie, every murder, every insult swallowed for the Order's sake was a nail in his coffin. Yet he never stopped. Even when Dumbledore's plan revealed itself to be a suicide mission for Harry, Snape did not break. He gave Harry the memories that would lead him to his death because he believed the war had to end. When Voldemort ordered Nagini to kill Snape, there was no last-minute appeal to friendship or mercy. Snape faced the snake, felt its fangs rip into his neck, and still thought only of what had to be done. His last conscious act was to give Harry the key to defeating Voldemort. He did not tell Harry to avenge him. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply did what needed to be done because the promise he had made to Lily all those years ago still bound him. That unbending will, that refusal to surrender to despair, was pure Gryffindor. Snape's life was a testament to the idea that bravery is not always bright or noble-looking. Sometimes it is grim, ugly, and thankless. He lived in a world where he could not afford tears, yet he felt more deeply than almost anyone. He kept that pain buried so deep that even he could barely see it anymore, but it guided everything he did. The easy path would have been to die early, to stop pretending, to surrender to Voldemort or abandon the Order. But he stayed. He chose to keep fighting in the worst way imaginable, by living. He may have worn green and silver, but in spirit he was every bit a lion. His brand of courage was not the roaring defiance of Harry or the brash recklessness of Sirius Black. It was something harder, darker, more painful. He accepted that no one would ever thank him, that the children he protected would spit on his name, that the world would remember him as a traitor. And he let them, because it was the only way to win. That was the truth of Severus Snape's Gryffindor heart. He would do anything, endure anything, suffer anything, so long as the mission succeeded. So when we speak of Gryffindors and their readiness to suffer for what is right, we should remember Snape. He did not seek glory, he did not ask for loyalty, he did not want love, he wanted one thing, to keep his promise. And for that promise, he accepted more pain than most could imagine. That is why he could have worn scarlet and gold with honor, because he earned them in blood, silence, and the unbearable weight of his own unwavering heart. Number 22, ability to see the truth. Severus. Snape was not the easy hero of legend or the selfless martyr of bedtime stories told in Gryffindor dormitories. He was the man who saw through illusions, who refused to be comforted by falsehoods, and who carried the weight of unvarnished truth like a knight with a battered, unyielding shield. Gryffindors, famed for their bravery, often charged at enemies with swords drawn, but Snape's weapon was vision, the unflinching eye that saw things as they were. When others knelt before Lord Voldemort's rhetoric about blood purity and grandeur, Snape recognized the monster beneath the robes, the unquenchable hunger for power that would consume wizard-kind. "The Dark Lord will return," he told Dumbledore in the graveyard of his own certainty, knowing that loyalty to Voldemort would be nothing but death and ruin. This wasn't cowardice nor blind obedience, but a terrible clarity. He chose the truth of Voldemort's evil over the comforting lie of belonging to the winning side. Snape's ability to see Voldemort for what he was separated him even from many who claimed to resist. It was not enough for him to oppose the Dark Lord's ideology in polite conversation at the Ministry. Snape was willing to risk everything, including his soul, to undermine him from within. He joined the Death Eaters as a young man, perhaps tempted by the same illusions that seduced many, but he learned quickly the real nature of the cause he served. He heard the screams of the innocent, witnessed the cruelty that was not the byproduct of revolution, but its very fuel. The moment he learned that Lily Evans, the only person he had truly loved, would be killed because of a prophecy he had relayed, he saw clearly the monstrous cost of following Voldemort. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, J.K. Rowling writes, "I have spied for you and lied for you, put myself in mortal danger for you." Everything was supposed to keep Lily Potter's son safe. His voice cracked, not with fear, but with the anguish of truth. He had helped create the future he now sought to sabotage. Unlike many who served Dumbledore, Snape did not idolize the old wizard. He saw Albus not as a saintly father figure, but as a master tactician who used people, who plotted their deaths as calmly as a general moving pieces on a board. Snape's fury with Dumbledore for raising Harry like a pig for slaughter was not insubordination for its own sake, but the result of seeing the truth that others could not or would not admit. He was not blind to Dumbledore's wisdom or his commitment to defeating Voldemort, but he would not flatter the headmaster's conscience by pretending those plans were merciful. When Dumbledore asked him to kill him to spare Draco Malfoy's soul, Snape agreed not out of love but out of obligation to a grim truth that no other way existed to protect the boy. In Half-Blood Prince, Snape says, "You ask too much," and Dumbledore replies, "I ask only this, that you do what is necessary." In those few words lies the essence of Snape's Gryffindor-like courage. He did not pretend necessary things were good, only that they were required. Even his enmity toward Harry was layered with truth, no matter how cruel it appeared. He did not see Harry Potter as a shining hero destined to defeat Voldemort. He saw James Potter's arrogance in the boy's face, the same smirk that had taunted him in school corridors. Yet Snape did not abandon Harry to Voldemort's designs. He recognized, with unblinking honesty, that Harry was not James, that he was Lily's son, and that this child deserved protection no matter what resentment Snape carried. In Deathly Hallows, Dumbledore says, after all this time, and Snape's response always is more than a vow of love. It is an acceptance of truth. He would never forgive James Potter, but he would not let that hatred justify abandoning Lily's child. That is a harsh, unsentimental kind of bravery, and one that Gryffindor House, so proud of its directness, ought to respect. Snape's talent for truth also made him the best possible spy. To survive among Death Eaters, one had to see past posturing and slogans to the real motives and fears that ruled the Dark Lord's followers. Snape was no romantic about their cause. He understood their politics, their cowardice, their willingness to betray one another. He did not sugarcoat their crimes to Dumbledore or himself. This gave his intelligence value beyond price, and gave him a lonely, terrible insight into human corruption. Gryffindors may value roaring defiance on battlefields, but Snape fought in shadows with knowledge as his sword, knowing that a single misplaced lie could doom them all. When Voldemort returned, Snape was ready. He did not flinch or hesitate. He resumed his role, knowing that every day he walked among murderers, he risked exposure and death. Such clarity of purpose, shorn of any illusions about the moral cost, is bravery in its purest form. There was also the matter of Draco Malfoy. Snape saw through the boy's swaggering cruelty at Hogwarts to the terrified child pressed into service as an assassin. Where others would condemn Draco as irredeemable, Snape recognized the truth of the boy's situation, that Voldemort would punish his entire family if Draco failed. He offered Draco the Unbreakable vow not as an accomplice to murder, but as a shield. He arranged to kill Dumbledore himself so that Draco would not have to. When the moment came, Snape's hand did not tremble. He committed murder to save a child's soul, seeing the unpalatable reality that mercy sometimes demanded atrocity. Gryffindors often talk about saving the innocent, but Snape proved it by sacrificing any hope of his own redemption in the eyes of others. He accepted being hated if it meant others could live. Nor did Snape lie to himself about who he was. He did not excuse his bitterness or cruelty by claiming they were virtues. He knew he was an angry, vengeful man. He acknowledged that his loyalties had been self-serving once, driven by personal pain and rejection. But he changed. He refused to let the truth of his own ugliness justify repeating his mistakes. Even when he terrorized students, he was not the smiling hypocrite Dolores Umbridge was. He did not pretend his punishments were for their own good. This unflinching honesty about himself was perhaps the hardest truth of all. Gryffindors are celebrated for acknowledging fear and doing what is right anyway. Snape did something even rarer. He acknowledged his own flaws and refused to let them define the limits of his duty. Snape's contempt for hypocrisy was also an act of truth-telling. He did not flatter the Ministry of Magic or seek social advancement. He did not try to clean his image for public approval. Even as a Hogwarts teacher, he remained the dark, glowering figure who terrified students because he would not pretend to be something he wasn't. He saw the cowardice of Fudge's administration in refusing to acknowledge Voldemort's return, and he would have spat on their need for comforting lies. When Cornelius Fudge dismissed Harry's testimony about Cedric Diggory's murder, Snape did not try to soothe the boy with platitudes. He showed Fudge the branded dark mark on his own arm, evidence of Voldemort's return that no sane man could deny. He chose revelation over safety, knowing it would cost him any chance of public redemption. It is easy to see courage in Gryffindor terms as grand gestures, duels on castle roofs, battles in the Great Hall. But Snape's courage was quieter and crueler. It was the courage of refusing to look away from suffering, of accepting necessary compromises. He saw that Voldemort's defeat would not be bloodless, that Dumbledore's plans would break hearts and lives. He did not run from this knowledge. He held it as tightly as the vial of memories he gave Harry at the end. Those memories, showing his life's truth, were his final gift. In them lay the instructions for defeating Voldemort once and for all, even at the cost of Harry's life. Snape did not pretend this was heroic. He accepted it was monstrous, and did it anyway. His entire existence as a double agent was a testament to seeing the world as it really was. He recognized that neither side was pure or blameless, that the war itself would leave deep scars on every survivor. Yet he chose his side not because it was easy or because it flattered his pride, but because he had seen the truth of Voldemort's evil and could not allow it to triumph. He knew that Dumbledore's methods were manipulative, but he also knew that the alternative was surrender, and he would not surrender. "The boy must die?" he asked, outraged, yet he accepted that truth when no other choice remained. There was no grandstanding, no declaration of nobility, only grim resolve. Snape's love for Lily was often described as obsessive, even unhealthy, but it was also honest. He never pretended it made him good. He did not call it noble. He understood it was selfish, that it drove him to betray Voldemort only after Lily was threatened. Yet he let that truth guide him for the rest of his life. He did not forgive himself. He did not forget. He did not try to erase the past. Instead, he let it define his mission, let it chain him to the promise he made to protect Harry. That unrelenting self-awareness is a form of bravery as harrowing as any duel. Even Harry, who hated Snape for years, recognized this truth at the end. He named his son Albus Severus Potter, saying, "You were named for 2 headmasters of Hogwarts. One of them was a Slytherin, and he was the bravest man I ever knew." Harry did not admire Snape because he was kind or good or pleasant. He admired him because Snape saw what had to be done and did it. He admired him because Snape did not hide behind comfortable illusions, did not claim the moral high ground while others died for him. He saw truth as clearly as any Gryffindor, perhaps more so, and bore its weight without complaint. In the end, Snape's greatest tragedy was also his greatest testament to Gryffindor-like courage. He died reviled, misunderstood, his motives hidden from nearly everyone. He did not die a martyr in the public eye. There was no cheering crowd, no statue erected in his honor. He left behind only memories, grudging respect, and a lesson in brutal honesty. That seeing truth is not enough unless you act on it, no matter how it damns you. Gryffindor House has always celebrated the bold, the daring, those who rush in where others fear to tread. But Snape showed a different kind of bravery, the courage to see, to know, and to act, even if no one would ever thank him for it. Number 23. Loyalty to memory. Severus. Snape's story is often told as one of Slytherin cunning and hidden motives, but his life contained an undercurrent of Gryffindor-like loyalty that never wavered, even when it burned him from the inside out. From the moment Lily Evans first smiled at him under the shade of the playground trees in Spinner's End, Severus attached himself to an idea more enduring than any ambition, the need to remember and to keep a promise alive long after it became a source of pain. Gryffindors are renowned for standing by the living, for defending friends against the darkness, but their valor also extends to the dead, to the ghosts of memory that demand fidelity. In this sense, Snape's devotion to Lily became his own battlefield, and his refusal to let her fade became an act of quiet bravery that might have earned Godric Gryffindor's nod of respect. Even as he rose through the ranks of Voldemort's followers, wearing the dark mark as a badge of misjudged purpose, Snape kept the memory of Lily intact, a fragile truth hidden behind the sneer and the cold voice. His Patronus, always the silver doe, was a reflection of that unchanging allegiance. Dumbledore himself, a man who had measured many hearts, recognized the significance of it when he watched the ethereal doe drift across the office. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Rowling writes, "After all this time," and Snape's answer, "always," became a testament to the power of memory over all. Else, Gryffindors might have claimed that moment as their own, for it took the courage of a lion to keep faith with a love so long dead, to let that devotion define every dangerous choice that followed. Snape's loyalty was not a convenient shield to excuse his darker affiliations, rather it was a burden he chose to carry. Unlike those who surrendered their past to ease the weight of guilt, Severus never allowed himself the relief of forgetfulness. When he agreed to protect Harry Potter, he did not do so because he believed in the boy himself. He did it because Harry's eyes were Lily's eyes, and to Snape, that detail mattered more than the boy's fame or destiny. Every time he looked at Harry, he was forced to remember not only the woman he loved, but also the reasons she was gone. Gryffindor courage is often measured in duels and heroic acts, but there is a different, harder courage in facing memories that cut deeper than any curse. It was not simply that Snape remembered Lily, it was that he never permitted time to soften his conviction that she deserved better, that her death was an abomination he could never set right. His Patronus, unchanged for decades, was an emblem that no ambition, no temptation, no rationalization could diminish his fidelity. Many witches and wizards would have allowed their memories to fade or turn bitter, but Snape refused. When Dumbledore asked him to take up the most dangerous role of all, a spy within Voldemort's circle, Snape accepted, knowing he would be forever despised by both sides. His loyalty was invisible to most of the world, yet it was as steady and uncompromising as any Gryffindor oath. Consider how often Gryffindors in the past were defined by their capacity to honor the fallen. Remus Lupin, who risked his life to protect James Potter's son out of remembrance for friendship. Sirius Black, who would have died rather than betray James and Lily's memory. Snape, for all his acid tongue and coiled resentment, belonged to the same tradition. He swore that Lily's sacrifice would not be wasted, and he defended that vow with every scrap of cunning and nerve he possessed. Even when it required him to kill Dumbledore to protect Draco Malfoy's soul, he did not flinch from the unbearable necessity. His steadfast adherence to a promise made in grief showed that he possessed the same uncompromising heart that had made countless Gryffindors famous. In the darkness of his private chambers, Snape must have relived Lily's death countless times, the green flash of the killing curse, the cry that split the nursery air, the knowledge that he had played a part in bringing her to that end. But unlike many who sought absolution, he never let himself forget. This choice to remain shackled to remorse was not cowardice, but a kind of relentless valor. It would have been easier to discard those memories, to let bitterness consume him entirely, yet Snape held fast to what he knew was true, that he had loved her and failed her, and that love could never be permitted to rot into resentment. In a world defined by shifting alliances and expedient betrayals, his fidelity was a rare and dangerous thing. Snape's story was not only about protecting Harry or deceiving Voldemort, but also about proving to himself that Lily's trust in him had once been justified. Gryffindors are often marked by the need to prove themselves worthy of those they admire, and Severus's entire life was an unending effort to do exactly that. He walked into peril every day, knowing that he was surrounded by Death Eaters who would have killed him for treachery. He endured the loathing of the Order of the Phoenix, who saw him as a poison among their ranks. He accepted the contempt of the very boy he saved time and again. He did all of it because to abandon the memory of Lily would have been to abandon the last remnant of his own honor. There is a passage in Deathly Hallows that shows the extent of his sacrifice. As he lay dying in the shrieking shack, bleeding out from Nagini's bite, Snape summoned the strength to give Harry his memories. He did not ask for forgiveness or recognition. He simply needed Harry to know the truth. This was the final act of a man who had spent his life guarding a flame he could never allow to gutter out. Gryffindors have always believed that some promises matter more than life, and Snape's dying gift was the ultimate proof of that conviction. To call Snape merely a Slytherin is to ignore the fierce courage it took to remain loyal to a dead woman's memory while the rest of the world called him villain. He never allowed his purpose to drift, never permitted his grief to make him small. His defiance of Voldemort was not driven by a hunger for glory, but by an unbreakable commitment to something purer than ambition, the need to honor a love that had outlasted death. When Dumbledore asked him why he still cared after so many years, Snape's answer was not a confession, but a declaration, as brave in its own way as any charge into battle. Every time Snape raised his wand to cast the Doe Patronus, he affirmed that Lily still lived within him. The text describes how the silver shape glided ahead of him, lighting his path. The Patronus moved ahead of him, and he followed it, leaving the darkness behind. For most Gryffindors, that would have been the clearest sign of kinship, to follow the light of memory no matter how long the night. Though he never wore the scarlet and gold, Severus demonstrated again and again that he could have done so, that he possessed the same fierce heart that refused to forget. In the end, the truth about Severus Snape was not that he was only a bitter spy or a cunning survivor, but that he was a man defined by the courage to love without reward. Gryffindors are celebrated for bold acts of defiance, but there is another sort of heroism, the determination to hold a vigil for what has been lost, to keep faith with the dead when all others have moved on. Severus stood watch over Lily's memory for nearly 20 years, and in doing so he became something more than a Slytherin double agent. He became a testament to the idea that valor sometimes wears the mask of silence. To the end, he did not break. His memory of Lily remained unsullied, not twisted into obsession or rage. Even when he had reason to despise her son's arrogance, he never let that contempt outweigh his pledge. The silver doe never changed, and neither did he. Gryffindor House has always honored the power of loyalty, and though the Sorting Hat placed Snape among the serpents, it might have whispered a different name if it had foreseen the course of his life. It might have seen in that small, pale boy from Spinner's End a capacity for love so consuming it eclipsed any other ambition. Severus Snape did not die in pursuit of personal triumph. He died to fulfill a promise, to ensure that Lily's sacrifice had not been in vain, to protect a boy he could barely stand for the sake of the woman he had cherished. That is a legacy any Gryffindor would recognize, for it is courage in its purest form, not the courage to face dragons or dark wizards, but the courage to remain faithful to the memory of the fallen. His life was a monument to that endurance, a reminder that sometimes the bravest hearts beat in unexpected checks. Number 24. Capacity for great pain in service of a great cause. Severus. Snape's life was the embodiment of silent sacrifice, a prolonged act of pain carried out in the shadows of Hogwarts' torchlit corridors. While many remember Gryffindor House as the domain of roaring courage, chivalry, and open defiance, it is often overlooked that true Gryffindor bravery can also take the form of enduring endless suffering for a cause that may never reward or even acknowledge such torment. In this hidden way, Snape's path bore more resemblance to the spirit of Godric Gryffindor than the world has been willing to admit. From the moment he switched sides and joined Albus Dumbledore, Snape began a lifelong commitment to pain, and not the kind that can be salved by applause or recognition, but the kind that festers alone in silence. His every action after the death of Lily Evans was a testament to a Gryffindor-like readiness to walk willingly into the flames of misery for the sake of others' future. It is no exaggeration to say that Snape deliberately embraced a life designed to break lesser men. The potions classroom in the dungeons became his citadel of solitude, where contemptuous students whispered behind his back and the staff only tolerated his presence. The other teachers, Professor McGonagall, with her stern suspicion, and even kind-hearted Professor Sprout, regarded him with wary civility, as if the stain of his former Death Eater associations could never be washed away. He bore the hostility of almost every Gryffindor who passed under his gaze, and he returned it with sharp sarcasm, never allowing himself the luxury of explaining that he was risking everything for them. When Harry Potter looked into his dark eyes and saw only loathing, Snape never once let slip the truth that his scorn was the mask he had chosen to wear, a disguise as vital as any polyjuice potion. More than any other professor, Snape lived each day in a tightrope performance between survival and exposure. He was Voldemort's man in Dumbledore's circle and Dumbledore's spy in Voldemort's ranks. One single misstep, one careless word, one misplaced expression, and the Dark Lord would have known the truth. This, more than any duel or battlefield charge, was a test of steady courage. It demanded a special kind of endurance, not the sudden heroics of the moment, but the grinding, daily submission to fear and tension. Gryffindors, like Sirius Black, were celebrated for their boldness, but they never had to maintain a deception so total that it swallowed their very identity. Snape allowed his name to be synonymous with cruelty, so his true purpose could remain hidden. His greatest bravery was never seen by the world he protected. Even in the darkest days, Snape clung to the knowledge that no one would ever thank him. Albus Dumbledore understood this better than anyone. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore said with quiet certainty, "You are a braver man by far than Igor Karkaroff. You know that, don't you?" This remark hinted at a recognition that Snape's resilience surpassed that of men who had fled rather than face their own terror. Snape never fled. He stayed, knowing that the price of his loyalty was the annihilation of his reputation and the certainty that he would die despised. He walked this path because it was the only way he could honor Lily's memory and protect her son. Snape's ability to accept unending loneliness is the quality that most defines him as a potential Gryffindor. He did not simply endure being disliked, he engineered it. He took on the role of the villain so completely that even the Order of the Phoenix doubted his sincerity. He allowed Molly Weasley to call him untrustworthy, permitted Remus Lupin to question his motives, and accepted Minerva McGonagall's cold glares without protest. He never defended himself, never pleaded for understanding. His silence was a Gryffindor's silent roar, an act of defiance that said he valued the mission above the comfort of sympathy. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when Snape is dying, he whispers to Harry, "Look at me." His final wish was to see Lily's eyes one last time, the same green eyes he had vowed to protect at any cost. The fact that he kept that promise until his last breath is proof of a heart capable of incredible loyalty. That loyalty cost him every ounce of happiness he might have known. He could have abandoned the cause and slipped away into obscurity. Instead, he chose to endure and ultimately perish in a war he could never claim credit for helping to win. Many of Snape's critics point to his cruelty as evidence he could never belong in Gryffindor, but they fail to see that much of this cruelty was a necessary facade. His treatment of Harry, however painful to watch, was part of the elaborate deception that kept Voldemort convinced of his allegiance. If Snape had shown Harry warmth, he would have risked exposing himself. His harshness was, ironically, an act of protection. In the end, Harry himself came to understand this. In the last book, Rowling writes, "He did it, though," said Harry. "He protected us." Those 4 words are a simple acknowledgement of a lifetime spent in uncelebrated courage. Snape's life was also a testament to the Gryffindor belief that some goals are worth any suffering. He never flinched when Dumbledore told him he would have to kill him when the time came. In that dreadful moment atop the Astronomy Tower, Snape faced not just the revulsion of murder, but the knowledge that every witch and wizard would believe him a traitor. He accepted this burden because sparing Draco Malfoy's soul and fulfilling the strategy to defeat Voldemort was the higher purpose he valued more than his own soul's peace. When Dumbledore pleaded, "Severus, please," Snape did not hesitate. That act required more than cunning or ambition. It demanded the sort of sacrificial will that defines a Gryffindor's greatest deeds. Snape was, in his way, a warrior of endurance. Unlike the Aurors who battled Death Eaters in open combat, he fought a different war, one of perpetual concealment. He could never lower his guard. Every occlumency lesson he gave Harry was a demonstration of his own ceaseless vigilance. To keep Voldemort from learning the truth required Snape to wall off the most painful parts of himself, his love for Lily, his remorse, his desperation to do one good thing before death. These hidden battles were the truest measure of his character, and they are why, in the quiet reckoning of the heart, he deserves to be called a Gryffindor in spirit. Snape's acceptance of being hated also reveals something Gryffindor-like, the fierce independence that refuses to let others define one's worth. While most people crave vindication or forgiveness, Snape needed neither. He knew that as long as Voldemort believed him loyal, the Order would doubt him, and Harry would despise him. He did not allow this to weaken his resolve. When he finally showed Harry the memories in the pensieve, it was not a bid for pity, but a final act of clarity. He was dying, and the truth needed to survive him. That moment was the culmination of a life of sacrifice, the quiet unveiling of all he had endured with no expectation of absolution. It is no coincidence that the Sorting Hat considered placing Harry in Slytherin, yet ultimately chose Gryffindor. Courage and ambition are often intertwined, and Snape embodied that paradox. His ambition was never for power, wealth, or fame. It was the ambition to protect Lily's son and bring down the most feared dark wizard in a century. Such a mission required a lion's heart hidden behind a serpent's mask. No other character in the series demonstrated such an unrelenting willingness to hurt himself for the sake of a future he would never enjoy. Snape's life was not merely about suffering, but about choosing suffering. That is what makes his story so compelling. Every day he could have abandoned Dumbledore's plan, escaped to a quiet existence far from war. Instead, he remained in the castle where Lily had once laughed, where her son walked the same halls, a constant reminder of all he had lost. He did this because in his heart he was not content to stand aside while Voldemort claimed victory. He chose the path of thorns, a decision that reflects the true essence of Gryffindor sacrifice. Snape's memory should not be confined to the bitterness of his sarcasm or the severity of his punishments. Those were only the surfaces of a life defined by unrelenting devotion. He spent 2 decades performing a feat of emotional endurance so severe it would have broken most wizards. His was a kind of courage that never asked to be witnessed and never hoped to be understood. In this way, Severus Snape proved himself not just a man of Slytherin cunning, but also a Gryffindor capable of great pain in service to an even greater cause.